So welcome, David. You're the founder of Sentry and known online as the most authentic person you know. So I'm looking forward to some candid conversation today. And we'll start by digging into that question. So we're sitting here at the Node.js stage, and Prisma is the most downloaded ORM for the Node and TypeScript ecosystem. And we got there by being early to introduce new features in the TypeScript ecosystem that enabled us to just deliver a much better developer experience than the competition. So in a way, our thesis is that we can build a sustainable business by providing better developer experience than other companies. What do you think of that theory? Does that make sense to you?
I would say I think that's spot on. I mean, I always look at things like friction. What are the objections you're going to get from somebody adopting your product? And like, the more work it is to adopt it, or the more complicated it is by creating a bunch of manuals, it's just friction. And so I'd agree. I'm like, were there even ORMs? There probably were, but I used Prisma before. And I'm like, were there even ORMs for Prisma in the JavaScript ecosystem? Well, like, not that I used. I think it was the first one I saw that had any level of arguably DX. But I think it's really important. Like Sentry does the same. Like we had the same where Sentry must work without you putting in any effort. You install the SDK, it does everything. And like there's a lot of companies that are very successful at the same model, which is fundamentally tied to the idea of like you sort of take on the work so your customers don't have to, right? It's kind of what we're here for. That's why business exists at the end of the day. So I think it's super important.
So when you go to your GitHub profile, it says Sentry is a developer-first error tracking and performance monitoring tool. It's very developer-centric. How important was that for you in the early days and getting traction and getting people to use it?
So that is, we've coded that into our values. Our values are basically, they're not we are nice people, they are how we run our business. One of them is we are nice people, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. But one of our values is for every developer. And I go through this spiel every 2 weeks with Nehemiah Myers. And it means two things. One is it's monopolization, so it's every developer. Like we're building something for every single developer, and we want to like be competitive for everybody. And two is the target persona is the developer, right? And that's super, super important. And so it's like when you think about it, like we don't target WordPress developers because often they're actually WordPress installers, not WordPress developers. It's a very different thing. We don't target SRE, other sort of developer roles. And so I think it's really important to understand who your target market is, And for what it's worth, I think when we decided that, we were a little bit naive about it. I could not tell you, the differences between developers. Some are just more aligned with us than others, but at least the intent was there.
So a thing we've been trying to do over the last year is to better understand developers using Prisma. We try to segment the user base. Do you do the same thing? Do you think of different Sentry users, customers as different personas, or do you try to reason about how they interact?
We kind of do, and then we kind of don't. And so segmentation is weird because if you look at it from a business point of view, segmentation is often like these verticals. So it'll be like data companies or media companies or something. The only segmentation we kind of focus on is like the language ecosystem because JavaScript people are different than Python people are different than Java people, And then it turns out that version matters a lot more to us. I think there's probably more to it we could do, but we haven't had to, and we've gotten this far with just sort of that focus. But that's even like, from our angle, it's kind of like, we know, we have a good grasp on who needs our product and why. Like we know JavaScript developers need it because there's no laws, there's no nothing, We know Java developers don't want it because they don't really build new technology. But I don't know, it's kind of surface level is how I describe it.
So when we started building Prisma 4 or 5 years ago, we thought that we would be providing a tool for all major language ecosystems. So we built the core in Rust so that we could build wrappers for all languages. And what we have found is that 95% of our users there in the Node ecosystem is TypeScript and JavaScript. Who uses Sentry? What language ecosystem is biggest for you?
So here's a tidbit that I memorize and I regurgitate every opportunity I get. In 2019, JavaScript was the largest ecosystem and the fastest growing, and it still is today. And that's something everybody should consider if they live in this space, right? That is the target market of every single developer, right? And so I think in Sentry, something like 60% of our customer base uses us for JavaScript. They might use us for something else, but at least uses us for JavaScript. And that's super, super important because that is, in a lot of cases, it's like the gateway as well, and it allows you to expand. It's interesting because we know why. We have all these, we have hypotheses on why. But you can look at it, again, surface level, and it all just makes sense. It's super rational. It's like, we're all building these crazy new front ends or something. For us, they're always broken. They're hard to debug. We build technology.
Which is great, right? You can sell it.
It's like, we're like, what do they call it? It's like we're the water salesman. I don't know. But that is the market. That is like fundamental to the market. And I think the other side is like, if you're looking for a market, there's not another clear market that is like objectively growing or dominating. Like you, like take the server, like web servers, right? Yeah, Node is big, but I think JavaScript is successful despite Node, right? It's because it works on the front end. We just want to use one language. But it's like Node's not a clear winner on the back end. Python no longer is. Ruby is. Go is. Like nobody actually dominates.
It's the browser. The browser is spreading it all along.
Yeah, it is. It is fundamentally that. I think Node's success is because people want to code share. And arguably, I think Node's success partially these days is because of React, especially more recent layers. And that's fine. It is what it is. But like recognizing that is, I think, super important.
I wanted to go on a bit of a tangent here. I've been following you on Twitter, and here's a tweet you wrote recently. I find it wild the whole system space is still caught up on this observability marketing. I don't need to observe systems, I need to debug them. So what is this observability stuff, and why do you care about it?
I actually have no idea what this observability stuff is. You'll find I like talking shit. There's a lot of marketing. There's always marketing. I hate marketing, like traditional marketing. And so you'll find a lot of our competitors, which some of them are very, very scary big companies. They talk about observability as if that's like a thing. And I think what observability means to them is recording lots and lots and lots of data. And I don't know about everybody else, but our data infrastructure bill is already enormous. We don't need it to be even more so. And a lot of the data you record is just useless. You don't ever touch it. It's like you make dashboards and you never look at them again, that kind of thing. And so, I always talk with the team. I'm very active in dog fooding our product and stuff. And we'll have a bunch of widgets and stuff all over our product. We are guilty of all these same things. And I'm like, I can't even solve the problem I have. Like, just let me debug the problem. Let me search for the answer. Let me do this specific thing. The widgets aren't helping me, And the widgets are a symptom of the larger problem, which you especially see in the monitoring space. But I think in any space related to data, you have the same problem where you just collect a lot of stuff because hypothetically it's useful. And then practically speaking, it isn't, but it's very expensive.
So it's fear-driven. What does Sentry do different?
Well, so Sentry is complicated because we have multiple products. Our core product is the error monitoring. You start there. Fundamentally, what we try to do in error monitoring is collect the useful data, discard the not useful data. We have a bunch of technology to do this. But then even more so when we collect it, we try to make it as useful as it can possibly be. So we actually collect way more than you need to that same point. But the data we collect is almost like free. And it always has like a time and a place. Whereas on the counter side, performance, which is like this other entire space of the monitoring industry, which is like latency data, is it fast or slow? Tracing is caught up in this, or metrics are a good example of this kind of thing. You just collect a lot of stuff hoping that when there is a problem, you'll have collected the right stuff. Almost all the time, what happens is you didn't collect the right stuff, or you collected it in the wrong format, and so you just have to go back and change your application, or if you're like in an analytics space, you have to go change a pipeline to compute some new properties or something. You're always having to do that no matter what. And so in that world, it's like, we also collect a lot of information, but you end up in this world where it's always too much. Even if you wanted to collect it all or could afford to collect it all, the technology is incapable of collecting it all. Like, you have to rely on sampling, and then once you rely on sampling, you're like, well, information is now inaccurate, so how do I make it the most useful it can be when I don't have the complete picture? And it's actually like this interesting rabbit hole you go down of, which I think is the really enjoyable part of software engineering, is finding compromise and constraints and then adapting problems to them. It just fascinates me, but I feel like that problem exists all over the space.
It seems like the industry is really trying to standardize on open telemetry, and you're a part of this. And it's tricky because a lot of different people, they want to do different things. We're trying to get this all into one system, one format. What is your read on where we are with this?
Personally, I think open telemetry is terrible. And particularly in the JavaScript community, it's especially bad. I think it tries to be good in Node, but it's very unstable. We just had somebody complaining about this to us today. Very, very correctly complaining to us about us now leveraging open telemetry. So the problem is like everybody wants good instrumentation. Like I think Prisma has it baked in, right? Like you've built it, and it's very important. You need to be able to understand like, okay, what are the SQL queries I'm making, the actual queries against the database to debug database like load performance issues, right? And so you need this instrumentation, and historically it's been a pain to get any of it. Everybody has to roll their own, you know? And so the idea of a standardized format to implement traces totally makes sense to me. The practical implementation, very spotty. It's very spotty, it's like immature, it's unstable, it changes way too much. It's got the node problem, I think, in general. And then actually in most ecosystems, it's not good or it doesn't exist. So like in the browser, it's really bad. Like people complain about our SDK and they're like that 20 kilobytes or something it takes. OpenTelemetry is like 500 kilobytes or something. It's like nobody's running that thing, you know? And it feels a little disconnected from reality. And so I think it started with good intents, and now it looks like a big accompanying standards committee kind of thing, you know?
Designed by committee. Nobody wants that. And when we spoke yesterday, you told me that you still love writing software and writing code, building software, and you emphasized that code is a means to an end for you. What do you mean by that?
I just like building things, and it's like, I don't think of it as creativity because I don't consider myself a creative, but if I have a problem, I can kind of go write software and build it, or if I have something that's interesting me, I can like try to test it out with software. I think that's a really important idea, and the world's getting more and more of that, and, you know, maybe the AI craze makes it even more accessible. But I just find it, I'm not a people person, is how I would describe it. I very much like software. I like building software. I don't really get to do it for my day job anymore. But it's still like a great outlet just because you can actually solve, it's kind of like the world is yours. You can solve so many problems independent with nobody else's help, with nobody else saying you can or can't do a thing, you know. And I find it just fascinating. Like an analogy I would give you is, I'm sure a bunch of people have 3D printers. I bet a lot of people don't use them other than to 3D print little toys or something. It's really easy to learn to model 3D objects, really easy. And then all of a sudden you can print things that fix annoying things in your life. Like, oh, you needed an adapter to put this on a wall. You know, like random things, like we built like a coat rack in a wardrobe. Basically we built like things to hold the pole, right? And it was stupid easy to model. And I'm like, oh, I can solve new problems in my life by just learning this new technology thing, right? And software is kind of that.
That sounds super cool. I don't have a 3D printer. I have a normal printer, and I hate that thing. But I'm just worried that putting in a 3D printer will make it even worse. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the business of software development. You're the founder of Sentry, a company that is doing very well selling software to developers. Do you view the software developers as the customer, as the target audience? Or how do you distinguish between different kind of stakeholders in that equation?
Yeah, so we are quite different here than most businesses. Most businesses, and many salespeople we hire our business wrongly, will tell me that the developer is not the target customer. The developer is the user, not the buyer. And I will tell them they are flat out wrong in our business. It's not true for every business, but it means it could also be true in other people's businesses. And it's interesting because this has changed. When we did our fundraising pitch in 2015, which is 9-ish years ago, there was a slide in it. I don't remember what the slide was, but it said rise of the developer. And the whole premise was the CIO doesn't buy software anymore, or the CTO doesn't buy software anymore. The developer buys the software. Somebody else pays the bill, but like the other people effectively are not in the decision tree. Again, that's not true everywhere. It's not true in many industries, and it's certainly not true in all of technology companies. But in our case, the customer is the buyer, because the buyer effectively is like a champion in the company. They're like, I want this thing, and then the company's like, okay, we're gonna foot the bill, right? And that is a really interesting, special thing to have, because it means what we say internally is if we have $1 to spend, think of it in anywhere, product, marketing, anything, $1 goes to the developer. It's always focused on that. And that's a rare commodity to have. It's also nice because if you are a developer and you're selling to developers and building for developers, you kind of know how it all works. Everything fits together. But like we are very, very literal on that concept.
And the economic machine in your business is it's a SaaS, it's software as a service, and that means individual developers that can go sign up for a free trial, you put a little bit on a common credit card, and then grow into it. At the same time, you're also open source. Can you talk a bit about how that all fits together?
Yeah, so Sentry has somebody will burn me at the stake if I say open source. We have an open source-ish license, but you can self-host Sentry free, effectively, right? Same thing that we sell. You don't have to pass a dime. It's interesting because it's effectively, I think, like a marketing funnel, and this is not it wasn't conscious when we did this. It just a happenstance and I reverse engineered it. But it's basically a marketing funnel. And what's great, this is a really important story to anybody doing open source. You might think you can monetize the customers that use your open source software. You would be wrong. You often cannot, and that's okay. And so I want to give you an analogy. Early on in Sentry's history, when we first raised money, Uber used our open source software. They self-hosted it. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be great. We got Uber and Airbnb and Eventbrite, all these big companies. I'm like, I'm just gonna go convert them to SaaS, and it's gonna be great. We're gonna make lots of money day one. I think not a single one of them has ever moved to SaaS. I could be wrong about that, but Uber definitely didn't. And I was frustrated about this for the longest time. I'm like, how do we make money? Like none of the customers did, it was like very taxing. And then maybe a year later, I was talking to a random developer, just random conversation, and it's like, oh yeah, I used to work at Uber and I left and Sentry was awesome and joined this new company, you had a cloud service, so we just paid for it. I'm like, that's the funnel, And that was such an eye-opening moment for me. And now the whole business rallies around that. We don't even try to convert open source customers. Like, it's great. They can self-hosted customers. They can self-host. It's great. It's a funnel. If they and this was the VC pitch, by the way, which I'm very aggro when it comes to competition. The VC pitch was, if we don't make money, nobody will, because we will ruin the entire market. And that is still true. We will not allow anybody else to make money in our space. And so self-hosted, biggest companies in the world running. They either pay us or they don't. We win either way. And so it's phenomenal from that point of view.
So I've heard this from many different companies that has an open source component. It turns out that tech companies are really good at hosting software, running servers. But people from those companies, they go other places, and being able to say that Uber and all these other big companies, they're using our thing in production. They might not be using the SaaS thing. It doesn't matter for the story. They're using Sentry, and that is validating.
Absolutely. It just helps in so many ways. And eventually, I think Yana was talking about this, like developer trust, is, especially in our ecosystem. I think it matters actually in most ecosystems, but that trust component, goodwill, however you earn it, you got to keep it, and that is one version of it, right? Like, they can self-host it, they trust the product, they like what it is, they can take it anywhere. Most people actually want to pay you money if they can, to be fair. Most people are not trying to game the system or whatever. It's just like, then a lot of them work in, giant companies where it's a pain in the ass, so.
You live in San Francisco, where this AI hype is very real, to the extent where there's political pressure to go and regulate it before it becomes too powerful, it becomes a threat to humanity, basically. You're here in Berlin, in Germany, where there's not a lot of hype about tech stuff. Can you explain this to me? Explain it to all of us.
Well, so I think there are two things that are great about San Francisco. One, we are often very ahead of the curve. Okay, great is the wrong word. Two important aspects of San Francisco. The second is it is a very large echo chamber. And so when something becomes very popular, like AI is right now, everybody's on it tomorrow. The other version of this was crypto. Everybody was on it. We all know the stories. Most of it's not worked out. I think AI is a little bit different, to be fair. There's more practical uses of it. But I think that's what it is. There's a lot of money back in it. People have seen the value. To be fair, the entire larger tech industry is doing it, which is different. It's normally like a startup ecosystem that's doing it, but you got Microsoft and Google and Apple and everybody now. You're like, okay, it's not BS is what I would say. AGI and all this, that might be BS. But there is practical application what we're doing. I think it will change a lot of jobs in the near term. Not our jobs, but like call centers and some other things like that. And then it will create a bunch of other jobs as well. I don't know, I think it's interesting. We talk about it a lot. I think one thing you see in San Francisco that maybe you see less elsewhere, because of this hype and because of the weird economics of venture capital, there's a lot of companies that have basically failed to build businesses that are now AI companies, and they will probably fail to build a business there. So, yeah, don't over-rotate it on too much is what I would say. But there is some genuinely really good tech and really good ideas in there, but just use your brain a little bit when you evaluate some of these things. I think it'll be Berlin, I would argue, is, I don't know there's a better hub in Europe that looks similar to SF, but there's nothing that remotely looks like SF in the world. And so it will show up here. It's probably already here, but it will show up here in a big way, I'm sure, very soon. So
it's already here. We just don't believe that computers will run the world in 3 years.
I get you. I think our new CTO, I'm no longer CTO, I just hired somebody. When I was interviewing them, I asked them to give a presentation, and long story short, they used to work on Apple's car program, the autonomous vehicle program. And sort of their belief was, we've got some great technology that's very powerful, but our mistake is thinking the robots can automatically do stuff. So in this case, it's like full self-driving cars. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not there yet. Maybe it'll get there. It'll probably get there, but it's not there yet. Stop trying to make it work. It just doesn't work. What would be better instead is if you could make the self-driving more assistive. And so my analogy I was sharing was, you're on the highway for like an hour or two. I'm the vehicle. Hey, I could take over for you for this next hour or two because I know where you're going. I know it's on the highway. I know the car will actually drive itself in that case. Versus, good luck on this random road that it doesn't know it's going to work, and you're like stuck to the wheel because you're worried it's going to break. I think this is all kind of similar technology. It's all very futuristic. The LLM tech and all of this, very similar. It's like, how can it augment us and empower us to be more effective versus it's not going to, automate away really anything. So.
This is what Apple is really good at, right? And we saw this in the keynote the other day. Yes, they're doing the AI stuff, but they're doing it in a useful way, in small ways that actually work, that can deliver value to you day to day. We're coming to the end of this conversation. For the last question, I'm going to read another tweet of yours that will take us back to the beginning of Sentry, and then you can tell us a bit about that story. If you all only truly understood how difficult and how far away product market fit often is, Sentry got lucky on our first product, but achieving that level of product market fit, even when you're trying, and we weren't, is a lot more difficult than folks make it out to be. Most never make it. So can you tell us a bit about the early days of Sentry and finding product market fit?
So this is interesting because most companies you'll see are one-hit wonders. They build one product. I like to make fun of Dropbox. I'm sure they're great, but I used to work with them. Used to work there. They basically built one product. They never ever did anything else. They make a lot of money off that one product, and that's fine.
They tried other things, it didn't work.
They did try them, but they didn't actually try them with much conviction either. They had an email app, they had a photos app, and they just disappeared pretty quick. But one hit wonder kind of thing, right? And I think the challenge, it's actually very hard to build something successful and get traction and whatnot. And Sentry sees this where before I ever hired anybody in the company, arguably before I even had a co-founder for the business, Sentry had product market fit. It was already kind of going to grow. Now, it wouldn't be free. You have to maintain and adapt and do all this stuff. But we'd already solved the problem, is recognize the audience was there. The TAM, which is a really important concept in business, was there. But then trying to do that again is very, very hard. And so we've had that forever, which is good and bad, because it's good because business is successful. It's bad because how do we do that again? And so a good analogy that I shared as part of this is Sentry has roughly two large products. Error monitoring is the thing that has great product market fit. We've had it forever. It drives the majority of our revenue. And we share this publicly to some degree, so I'll give you that. Like, Sentry is north of 100 million in revenue for context. We have performance monitoring, which is an 8-figure business for us, which is a lot of money for most companies. It is an absolute failure at our company. It has not achieved product market fit. I say this, I exaggerate, but I'm very straightforward about what is and isn't successful. But if it was successful, it would be hundreds of millions of revenue on its own. And there's a lot of ways you can measure product market fit. But we've been at this like 4-ish years on this performance monitoring area of investment, and it's hard. And we try to innovate, and we're smart people, and we have a lot of domain experience, and it's still hard. And it doesn't come down to just product, it doesn't come down to just marketing or sales or any of these things. The fact that we actually make a bunch of money on it is only because we're already successful, and you get a lot of goodwill from your customers, and they're willing to try out your other stuff. And it's a really interesting dynamic, and so you can see this at like the biggest companies in the world where they kind of fail upward over and upward. But when you're a smaller company, it's very challenging. And so on one hand, it's like, I appreciate how difficult it is, and I talk to a lot of founders and I invest in companies, right? And the biggest challenge a lot of founders have is like getting to that first sort of thing that they unlock it, And I'm like, I don't know how you do it. I never had to do it. It's very, very difficult. And even what we're doing now is still something different than that first step. And our CEO, who has a little bit more experience in terms of VMware, he talks about this at the level of there are different stages of product market fit. And maybe our error monitoring is peak stage or close to peak stage, and everything else is like stage 1 out of 10 or something, Like, I'm sure there's some frameworks out there are for everything, but it's just a really interesting challenge that I think if you can figure it out, if you're one of those companies that can launch thing 2, thing 3, thing 4, really grow it in a way where you control it, you're gold. Like, that's the skill. I don't have it, so I just like to throw things at the wall and something will work.
Are there any companies you're aware of that has achieved this, somebody you look up to?
I think look at the companies you really admire. Now it's interesting because some of the companies have done it and some of the companies that even have done it then still spin. So Atlassian's a really good example. Jira, Confluence, HipChat failure, Bitbucket kind of failure. There's another dozen things in it that I forget that they do. But it's like they started kind of doing it and they tried and then maybe they didn't try hard enough, but they didn't nail it, right? Microsoft's interesting because Microsoft's pivoted very, very, very well. But they also have the cheat code. They're big. They sell to their existing customers and all this stuff. And so I don't know. It's tricky because I'm like, well, what company executes really well and continues to do it? And it's like, it's actually very rare. And I think NVIDIA has done a continuous job of execution, which is really nice. But it's like iterative, right? They start here, then they go slightly this way, and slightly this way, and slightly this way. Nobody's like, hey, let's go both of these ways at once. And I'm sure there's examples, but I don't know, because I think it comes in waves. And the biggest companies in the world have a way to stay relevant often. But the ones like IBM, where you don't really know what they do or how they make money, I think those are the ones where you don't see them capable of doing that. They have an entirely different business, which is just like, we can sell stuff. We're not really actually trying to bring things to market anymore,
And maybe the answer is that startups are really innovative, and when you have a big business making lots of money, just keep doing that and then go start some other company.
Yeah, I think it is. Like, again, Dropbox I would consider kind of a failure, but I make $1 billion plus in revenue off of this file.
Pretty good failure.
Yeah, it's a good failure. And so I'm like, I don't know, it's successful. But Dropbox is not Microsoft, right? There's a very big difference between those two companies. And so, I don't know, it's a really interesting thought exercise.
David, thank you for coming here chatting with me. It was really great. Now we're going to have 2 talks from Postgres platform companies that I'm looking forward to. So stay around.
Thank you.